City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, production.
A warm welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars, now in their 26th year, coming to you from the new Graduate Center of the City University of New York. These seminars offer a unique opportunity to explore with the professionals the realities of working in the theater. Today we have the production seminar, and it is devoted to that wonderful show, Contact. We will follow the creation of the play from its inception through the production and then what follows. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing, and I hope that you will enjoy and learn from today's experience. I would now like to introduce our moderator for this seminar, quite a veteran producer, and now President of the American Theater Wing, Roy A. Sumleo. Roy, would you now do this?
Thank you, Isabel. Isabel's told you why we're here. We're going to explore a lot about Contact. Let me introduce our panelists, please. On my right is Bernard Gersten, the executive producer of Lincoln Center Theater, who did produce Contact. Bernie has had perhaps 3 decades of experience in the not-for-profit institutional theater, as well as some commercial exposure. And next to him is John Weidman. John Weidman is a playwright. He is credited as the author of Contact. You may have known that he is a collaborator frequently with Stephen Sondheim. Wise Guys is your current effort. Assassins, Pacific Overture. Overtures, please. You did more than one, didn't you? Susan Stroman is sitting next to me. Susan is the director-choreographer of Contact. She's got a wealth of experience on Broadway. She did Crazy for You, she did Big, she did Steel Pier, and she was very acclaimed for her work on Oklahoma in London, which never quite got to America. But we're still waiting for it. We're still waiting for it. Next to her is Thomas Cott. Tom is the marketing director and director of special projects for Lincoln Center Theater. And he, too, has had both commercial and not-for-profit experience. And Tom is a lecturer and a consultant on theater arts. And on my far right is André Bishop, the artistic director of the Lincoln Center Theater. And André, if I'm not mistaken, you've probably spent your entire career, professional career, in the institutional theater, the not-for-profit. Yes. So let me start with you, if I can. Tell us, now we all know that Contact has just set the world on fire with its production, and what we really want to know is, how did it really start? What's the very beginning of Contact?
It started, well, it's so funny to talk about something that has become what you just said and think back to its beginning, which wasn't really all that long ago. I don't really remember because I forget everything except what happened this morning. But I think, truthfully, I had noticed Susan Stroman for a number of years and had seen a number of her shows. And I'd met her once or twice socially, but I didn't know her at all. And I had this idea, and you know, one doesn't have that many ideas in one's life. At least I don't. But this was, as it turned out, a good idea. I thought that she, number one, should come to Lincoln Center Theater and enjoy the benefits that this institutional theater that I have worked in all my life can offer, which is a certain ease of production, a kind of dignity afforded to the artists who work there, and freedom to create something new, and something that she really wanted to do. And I guess I'd felt, perhaps presumptuously, that I was sort of, I felt that she really had the makings of a director, and I thought it would be great to invite her to come to Lincoln Center where we could give her a home and have her create something new, not just for us, but for herself. So I called her. I had cleared the way with her beloved agent, Flora Roberts, and I called her up, and I said, would you be interested in coming in and talking to me about a show? And she said yes. And I mean, what else could she say? I guess she could have said no, but she said yes. And she came in and we talked, and I just said, look, I think you're really talented. You should be doing your own work. Lincoln Center Theater can really do such a variety of things for the people who work there. Please come here and do something, whatever you want, whenever you want. And we had a lovely talk, and I was instantly smitten. And then she went away, and I didn't hear from her for months and months and months. And because I do not have much aggression in me, though I'm working on it, I didn't dare call her because I thought, well, it was a good idea, and we had a nice time, and I know I can, you know, kiss her when I meet her as opposed to shake her hands, but nothing's going to come of this. And then suddenly one day she called and she said, well, I've been thinking about your offer, and I do have an idea, and I've called John Weidman, whom I had known from when we produced Assassins when I was working at Playwrights Horizons, and we would like to come in and talk to you about an idea we have. So they came in, and we talked about this idea that turned out to be the basis of the third piece in the play in the evening called Contact. And it was based on loosely based on a short story by Ambrose Bierce. And you know, when guys like me have meetings with people like them and they recount to you the plot of what they want to do, it always sounds awful. You know, the plot of Hamlet sounds boring. Well, I think it sort of is boring. But what you do is you say, oh, that sounds wonderful, because you believe in the talented people. If people are talented, you know they will make anything good, I think.
We never heard this before. We thought he loved
well, I'm
it.
only you know, it sounded interesting, but an idea is an idea. And anyway,
Getting worse.
Well, André, was it just a one-on-one meeting just between you
yeah.
and Susan?
And then John came in, but the point is they wanted to do something, and they were given an opportunity to come there, and they seized it. And so, you know, I said, great, this sounds good. And I mean, I'm being joking. It did sound good. And they went away, and I'm getting... Anyway, that's how it started. There were workshops and all of that, but it started with a phone call, and I sort of wish every play and musical could start with a phone call, and it rarely, if ever, does.
Well, Bernie, as the executive producer, obviously you are in continual communication with your associate. How does the producer look to something like this, where an idea is just going to suddenly come to life?
Well, the idea was not what came to life. What came to life was the work itself. What was offered was not to do a production, but to do a workshop to investigate an idea in a rehearsal hall. And the miracle, I think, of Contact is the work that took place. The original idea was miraculous. The fulfillment of the idea in the workshop was what was deeply affecting to us. And at the end, what were the dates of the first workshop?
February.
Yeah.
February.
And it's amazing what has taken place in the elapsing, 10 months, 9 months? Well, 9 months, it makes great sense when you think of it that way. But what happened was the first workshop was of the third work of Contact, which Susan and John will describe in detail, I presume. And after a month's work, it was only 4 weeks, wasn't it? Or 5, first workshop?
5 weeks.
5 weeks. And after the 5 weeks, we came to a run-through, and we were bowled over and deeply, deeply affected and moved and just couldn't get over it.
Well,
so it was a miraculous experience. But you must realize that was not a commitment to do a work. It was a commitment to do a workshop. It was a commitment to process, not to production. The commitment to production followed after the process.
Well, I think we should identify a workshop because it's a term that sometimes in the commercial theater has a different connotation. In this case, it was purely a creative experience. So what did you do? You've been given a license to do a workshop.
Well, after I met with André, I actually went right home and I called John Weidman. And I said, you've got to come over, because André Bishop said if I had an idea, we could do something there. So he came over, and in fact, we started right away in meeting once a week or sometimes twice a week, and trying to develop an idea. And in fact, I called John because I wanted to do something very contemporary, something that happens in 1999, and create a piece for now and for today's audience. And John has a very contemporary wit about him and dialogue about him. And so and plus John loves dance.
But
and not all
together.
writers love dance.
You'd work together.
Yes, so I've
once in-
known John
in-
for
and
the
you'd work
business,
together in
sure.
Big,
Right.
was it
Yes.
not? Right. Mm-hmm.
So he came over, and we just tossed out some ideas. And we both knew about the Ambrose Bierce short story, Occurrence at Owl Creek, and we loved that short story. And thought, is there any way to turn that into a story that happens in 1999? But I told John about an experience I had had a couple months before at an underground swing club in Lower Manhattan, where I went to this club and there was a girl there in a yellow dress. And she would step forward when she was ready to dance with a man, and she would dance with him, and then step back after she was done and get lost in the crowd. And then again she would appear and step forward. And I myself got obsessed watching her. Because of course it was in Manhattan, everyone was dressed in black and dark clothing, and this girl would step forward. And at the end of the night, probably about 3 in the morning, she disappeared. And then I wondered, you know, at some point she was going to change some man's life, you know. She was going to dance with the right fella and change some man's life. And I told John this story, and we tried to then see if we could combine the two short stories, and we came up with Contact. When we had what we thought would be right to go into a workshop, we went back to André with this short story, and he set up a workshop for us. But it all came out of a very pure place. For André and Bernie to give us 18 dancers in the cellar of Lincoln Center and just let us have this 5 weeks to create through improv and through following our idea, it has come out of a very pure place of creating. And we could have not done Contact in any other place but Lincoln Center.
Yeah, and even before we got to the workshop, the process of figuring out what we wanted to do was unfolded in a way which was only possible, as Stroh said, because we were doing it, you know, with Lincoln Center Theater's arm around our shoulders. There was absolutely, when I sat down with Stroh in her den, there were no assumptions about where we were headed or any obligations we needed to fulfill or anything about what the piece needed to be when it was finished. And we didn't even talk about it in those terms. We didn't talk about whether it should be a conventional musical, it should be this. We just played with possibilities, and we let the piece expand from an image into what it ultimately became. You know, ultimately, I mean, along the way, we found ourselves talking about whether or not people should sing, how much should they talk, in what way would dance express the story. But it was a rare and entirely satisfying creative experience because it was able to proceed at its own pace and without any requirements that needed to be satisfied along the way. So that, and indeed, it wasn't until we were pretty much ready to go into the workshop that we sort of stopped and said, you know, this looks like it's going to be about an hour long. Is that an evening in the theater? Will it need more? But we didn't worry about that. Even at that point, we didn't worry about it. All we worried about was fulfilling the ambitions for the piece which had developed as we imagined this third piece, which was Contact. And then, you know, once the workshop was done, that process continued in a different way, but it was terrific. It does not happen. You don't get to have this experience very often.
Well,
As
John,
you said, it could only have happened at Lincoln Center. Is this unusual for you as a producer to have this kind of thing take place?
I think maybe everybody in the world doesn't know what workshops are.
All right.
I mean, most everybody in the world who's likely to be listening knows what productions are. People decide on the basis of reading or listening or some combination of reading or listening, reading or hearing, or listening to somebody tell a story, or being handed a script, or listening to a bunch of songs, that they're going to do a play, produce a play or a musical. And then the process is very familiar to watchers and listeners of this program. You assemble money, or you're an institutional theater and you do it in a slightly different way. But what workshops are investigations, are creative investigations of, in some instances, an idea, in some instances, a fully developed work that's written and composed, and lyrics are there, and text is there. In this instance, it was the examination of an idea in private with no performance goal ahead. Nobody was going to perform it necessarily. It would take place over a period of time, and the discovery of the work and the evolution of the work would take place in the privacy of a rehearsal process. A workshop is a rehearsal, but usually rehearsals lead to performances. A workshop does not have performance as its end goal. You may decide in the course of a workshop that you're onto something, and you'll say, well, we'll perform it for somebody. We'll perform it for the producer and his nearest and dearest, or for the staff, or some combination thereof. But public performances are not at the heart of workshops. Under commercial circumstances, workshops are frequently done with a view to achieving or acquiring backers of the work. And then it's a demonstration with a purpose. That was not the purpose of this. The purpose of this workshop, and it's a luxurious kind of activity, was to discover if there was anything there, if there was a there, if the work would evolve in a way that would satisfy its authors and director. And so the reoccurrence of the word pure about this was very much in evidence from the get-go. From the telephone call that André made, there was no arching purpose. He wasn't asking Susan to do a revival or to do some work that was in hand. He said, could you use the theater to explore some desire of yours that perhaps has not yet been identified? And that's what took place. It was really quite amazing.
Bernie, do you think that in the commercial world, which I think more people are familiar with, that there's the opportunity to do something similar? Do you think there's ever an opportunity?
Essentially the same resources. What are the resources? The resources are a place, a private place, money, and will. Now, where anybody can assemble those three elements theoretically, but more often they occur in the not-for-profit sector, in the not-for-profit theater perhaps, than in the commercial arena. Not because one is pure and holy and good, and the other is bad and evil and money-driven. That's not the reason. Those are just coincidental aspects.
I don't know if everybody will agree with you.
No.
But I think there are really
jokes involved.
It's interesting to note that the workshop process began in the nonprofit theater. Actually, Bernie worked on the very first one on Chorus Line.
I don't know if it was it the first?
I think
never
so.
knew.
Well, certainly the best known one.
Well,
and I think it was subjugated.
What Thomas is referring to is the fact that at the New York Shakespeare Festival Public Theater many years ago, a workshop was begun, which was also based more on material than on an idea. The idea was there is something in this raw material, which was were a bunch of confessional first-person tapes that were developed by Michael Bennett. And over a series of workshops, a chorus line was born at the New York Shakespeare Festival Public Theater. On the first day of rehearsal, I had the effrontery to say, and I was sort of self-conscious about saying it, and I thought it was a bad joke, but I made it partly. I didn't make it totally. I said that the last time I had been in a rehearsal hall with a bunch of mirrors along the wall and a bunch of dancers warming up in leotards, something quite remarkable had evolved. That was some 3 decades before, or almost 3 decades before. I had no expectations that lightning, which rarely, I'm told, strikes twice in a similar place or the same place, would strike again. But it has been a strike. The number of people from the outside who have said to me, it's really quite surprising that you in your lifetime have had an experience with a chorus line and with Contact. I was amazed.
I think that the fact that we bring up a chorus line is not coincidental, just because you were at the birth of both. I think the Contact has been compared so much to that, I mean, in terms of its acceptance, in terms of its creativity, and also, by the way, its reviews, which is... I'm kind of interested in your, Tom particularly. Here's a show that appears in an evolution from a workshop. You suddenly decide, and not suddenly, but you eventually decide that perhaps it's ready for an audience, and you expose it to your audience of 299 seats each night, and wow, it explodes in this. Now you've got notices.
But we knew even before the notices. That's really the
Right.
true test of a popular show.
Right question.
From the very first preview, audiences of all stripes were enjoying this play. We had audiences that were very young, audiences that were older, and unilaterally the response was very, very strong. And it was interesting that after the reviews came out, that there was that extra lift that comes with reviews, but it was always a very audience-pleasing show. And you can't get out of the way of that. I mean, you have to help it along.
Well, let's take it, Andre, if we can. You now have this workshop, which everybody looked at and knew it shouldn't just end there. You should do something. What were the next steps then to bring this eventually to an audience?
Well, we had to do another workshop because there was a debate as to whether an hour's show was long enough, and I went to Bernie and said, do you think an hour is too enough time? And he said, yes, it's fine. And then the next day, in Gerstenian fashion, he said, no, we can't do only an hour. So
I don't say it like that.
no, you say it in a very
How
gentle.
did you say it? Let me hear.
I say it nice. Nice.
He said
That
it
was really
nice.
nice.
Well,
That was really
no,
nice.
there's
And
never
I-
been a one-hour show in memory. People like 90-minute show.
I was-
That's really a
Bonanza
favorite.
was an hour long.
I was-
How about that? That
And
worked for years.
I was happy because I felt an hour wasn't long enough. Anyway, so we had another one of those meetings, and it seemed clear that we needed, something to be. If Contact would be the end of the evening, we needed something for it. And you had discussed
Now, you
that
say
before.
a first act.
Yeah.
A first act. There had been discussions of this Fragonard painting, A Girl in the Swing. I mean, even before we did the first workshop, and there was also discussions of. I think at one point there was a sort of schematic idea that the first, if we had three pieces, the first piece would be all dance, the second piece would be in a bar and would be all dialogue,
Right.
Monologues, which actually that was the one idea I did not think was a good idea.
When did you decide it would be three pieces? Up until now, you were
Well,
talking
no,
about what?
after this meeting, we talked about various ideas, including the first half should be just another full length, but then they thought about it and I think decided that it would get in the way of Contact. The monologues idea was thrown out, and then they came back and said, we have two ideas. One was The Girl in the Swing, the Fragonard painting come to life, and one was to take place in an Italian restaurant, and I must say, the description of that was hilarious. So, again, we were in the enviable position to say, okay, let's do another workshop in the cellar, as you call it.
The cellar.
And it's colder than most cellars in the Beaumont basement. And let's workshop these first two pieces. Probably not do Contact, the third piece, with it. Let's just focus on these two, get much of the company back. And that's what they did. So the process repeated itself for the second workshop. But by that time, we had committed to doing a production of one piece or two piece or three pieces, so that there was an end in sight. And Stro and John were working very, very quickly, because the other complication was they both had busy schedules with Wise Guys and Music Man, and Susan said, we really, if we're going to do this, we have to do it in the summer. And we were able to capitalize on the second workshop, and we had a bit of a break, and then we went right into rehearsals for the production with mostly the same company, and that was of great help.
The other short stories came from actually when we started to work on Contact. We came up with quite a few short stories and different ideas.
Save it for Contact 2.
Contact 2. But when André and Bernie asked if we could put together a first act, we did have in the back of our minds already some other ideas for short stories, but what we did was do a takeoff on the word swing, because Contact does have a lot of swing dancing in it. So we thought, is there something, a spin-off on that actual word? We both knew of the Fragonard painting called The Swing, and we thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a piece of what we really thought Fragonard was thinking about when he painted that picture. And then the second piece was a takeoff on the word swingers, men from 1950s, the Rat Pack type. But as we developed that piece, it was clear that it was more important for it to be about the woman and for it to be about the wife. So it sort of veered from that, but still we stayed in that time. But all three pieces are about people connecting, their ability to connect or their inability to connect or their want to connect. And all three pieces are about fantasy, the first one being a fantasy that is realized fully in real time, and the second one being a daydream fantasy, and the third one being a subconscious fantasy where your subconscious comes out and saves you. So it does have a connection, all three stories.
John, you don't have, for those of us who've been fortunate enough to see Contact, and I think it'll be an enormously growing audience for many, many years, but I think that I think maybe it'd be well if you explain, this is not the kind of piece that you've written parts for people with dialogue as such. Could you explain that?
Yeah, let me explain a little bit about the form, and then I want to talk a little bit about how we got there. You know, Stroman and I are credited as co-authors, and indeed we are. And one of the things that became clear as we started to talk about what we wanted to do in our earliest meetings was that what we were headed for was a piece in which the storytelling would be carried by movement and dance, primarily. In a way, I suppose, the way singing, music and lyrics carry most of the storytelling ultimately in a successful musical. So that there is a balance between dialogue and dance which is unusual, and I think which many people recognize as unusual. At the same time, all three little pieces have the narrative, the stories are quite simple, but they are story-driven, all three of them. And they have very clear, very present narratives. They are not impressionistic dance pieces by any means. They're three little playlets, three little short stories, as Stroh says. And the first piece has one spoken line of dialogue in it. The second piece has a language is much more present than it is in the first piece. And in the third piece, that process continues, the balance between movement and dialogue. But dance, movement, is always the primary vocabulary, the primary language of storytelling over the course of the evening. And I think one of the reasons why, André referred to sort of our first ideas of what the first two pieces might be about, there was an intellectual neatness to the idea of movement, language, and then language and movement combined, but it became, as a result of seeing Contact, having worked it in a room, it was clear that that was not what the evening wanted to feel like. And because we had the ability, because the theater gave us the permission to do the first piece and not do anything more than the first piece, we learned an enormous amount from having to do it, which then informed the decisions we could make about what needed to go with it. If we had to design an entire evening before we went into a rehearsal room, I don't know where we would have wound up. I mean, we might well have wound up, throwing something out, trying to replace it with something else. We didn't have to do that. We could do it one step at a time, and that's what got us where we wound up. It was terrific.
I think there's one other thing that needs to be observed, which is when Contact was done in the first workshop, its length was its length. And I don't know, was there a bar added in production, in the rehearsal for production? It seems to me it was exactly the same length when it was final.
Yes.
But there was no pressure saying, wait, this is great, but we have to make it into a two-act work. Right. You have to have a first act and a second act. It has to be a single work, a unified work. That's not what it was about. It was perfect as it was, and it was, with whatever work remained to be done beyond the workshop process. But it was not an attempt to stretch it or make it fit into some other form, because that might be a better idea, Right. And so the idea of finding a first act and a different first act was, I think, wonderfully organic to the preservation of Contact as it evolved.
Yes.
In terms of your characters, I think that of all the musicals I've seen, I don't think there are more vivid characters than in yours. And yet, as you say, there's very little dialogue. Did you delineate the characters to each of the people that you cast them, or did that come out again in the workshop?
Well,
it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
I think we knew. I think part of the appeal of Contact also is especially the two characters, Karen Ziemba in the second piece, and then Boyd Gaines in the third piece. The audience relates to those characters. They find something of themselves in those characters, because those characters are very strong. And I think when we went into the workshop, we actually did know what those characters were, but hiring someone like Boyd Gaines and letting him find his footing in that short story has just made it richer. He plays a character who is thrown into a world of dance, and it's very foreign to him. And it's about somebody taking a chance in a foreign place. And Boyd Gaines, really, the actor, is being also, not only as that character, is being thrown into a very foreign place with all these dancers. So his vulnerability is very true and very real.
But your ensemble of dancers, each one of those is a specific character.
Yes.
How did that get created?
Well, that is
Through the workshop.
Through the workshop. I mean, we went into, and then I'll turn this over to Stro. I think it's of some interest that when we went into the workshop with the first piece, we had a script, which was a finished description of what the show is. We knew where the story started, we knew what the incidents and episodes were, and the dialogue, the way it gets massaged, the way it always does, but essentially everything which is said on stage basically was there. There was a little more that got cut and so on and so forth. But the people in the dance club who were not Boyd Gaines and who were not the bartender were simply described as the dancers in the club, and then through a combination of casting and what Strode developed with the dancers in the room, and this is what I mean, this is as much the writing of the piece as anything that was on paper before we started. We wound up with with very clear set of specific people.
Every dancer in Contact in all three short stories has a backstory. There is something, a character. Every dancer has a character and a backstory in each story of the evening.
How did you find the dancers? In other words, are all the dancers people you've worked with in the past, or
many of them are? Some are new, though. Some are new, but some are I've worked with in the past 5 or 6 years. Yes.
Well, why don't you just talk then about since you had characters that you had in mind? What was the casting process when you did that? Did you evaluate, can they fulfill
well,
these
they
characters?
all had to. All the dancers are really actors who dance, dancers who act. They all are very good actors. And they're all very creative also. And so if I have had them in my lifetime in another show and know that they are creative, they got into Contact. Because that's part of it was very stimulating and nurturing, and being in a very protective space creatively. And to have all these very creative minds together who all dance, you know, it was thrilling. But so they were cast with that in mind. They're all very bright. And for example, there are 3 fellas in Contact who are obstacles to Boyd Gaines, and it's Jack Hayes and Sean Hingston and Robert Wersinger, and they all have to be technically very strong, but they all have to look very powerful. They have to look like they're a threat to Boyd. So I had to cast 3 fellas who would look like they would be trouble to Boyd, and yet they had to be technically beautiful dancers at the same time.
But that was the fact that they were threats. That's something that you envisioned in the original script, I presume.
Well, we had, you know, I can't remember at what point that idea entered the stream of ideas that wound up in the rehearsal room. But it was those are the kind of conversations that we had as we were heading for the workshop.
I wanted to ask more about the workshop in production. How fully developed were the 2 workshops, and what was the cost of them? And I don't mean in complete dollars, but how do you find out how much this is going to cost and how much you're going to capitalize it for?
The basic cost of a workshop is the talented people who are working. And they're paid very, very modest wages for that period of time. And there are minimal props. In the case of Contact, what was required were sturdy objects like pool tables and the divan that had to be readily moved and yet extremely stable. So those were among the impediments. And then ultimately the creation of the swing and its physical requirements were developed in workshop, not at great expense, but just in finding the technical means of doing it. But the cost of the workshops, I think of both workshops, which were 2, 5 and a 4-week period. So it was 9 weeks with about 22 people being paid in the workshop, was some $250,000.
Mm-hmm. And is that because you have the facilities within
Yeah, we
the
had the
Lincoln
rehearsal
Center?
hall, but all the directly attributable costs of the workshop came to that.
That's not so unusual in terms of that. The cost of that is almost comparable to what one would pay in a commercial,
Yeah, it is.
except for the fact that they're running a studio. At what point did the designers come into the mix? I think design plays a very exciting part of Contact. And when did you bring them into the...
Very early on, actually, because you know, I know that the collaboration for me, for the choreographer, with the set designer, with the costume designer, and the lighting designer, it always happens early on for me. Because when I choreograph, I actually imagine things lit, and I imagine people dressed. So when I am choreographing in color, full Technicolor at all times. So I do bring them in early, and when we did the first workshop to Contact, sort of in the middle of maybe in that third week, I asked Tom Lynch and William Ivy Long and Peter Kazarowski to come in and watch and discuss with me what they saw and how what they do could support the dance. I should say, too, that about the first 3 days of the workshop, all we did do was dance, and we would switch partners, and we would dance more, and I would pair people up just to see how they did make contact with one another, how they connected, some of them were aggressive with each other, some were gentle with each other. And by just for 3 days doing improvs of just dancing with one another, we pulled out these characters.
How did you figure out what the girl in the yellow dress would wear?
Well, I understand that there were many yellow dresses.
There were many, and after the show report last night, I think there's going to be another
That's
one. Because the yellow dress has to do many things, because the fellas have to lift her, and of course the dress would be too slippery, or the dress would be too long and her heel would go in the skirt, or the dress would have sparkle and it would actually take the skin off of some of the fellas. So it went through many, many versions.
There are 9 now, right?
Yes, there's actually a yellow dress shrine in the basement with some yellow flowers underneath of it. But trying to find the very perfect yellow dress. So it has a mystery about it, and William Ivy Long has put his finger on it. It's a very beautiful dress, and it dances beautifully.
And Deborah Yates, just in passing, there was never a moment of temperament from her throughout the whole process of putting on these 9 different dresses, while she was building her performance.
We're going to sell them in the lobby.
From last workshop to opening first preview, how long?
Well, it was February, the first workshop, and then
June was
June was the second workshop, and then preview started in September.
Well, Tom, now that once you found that you had a show that you were ready to sell to the public, that becomes kind of close to your department almost exclusively. What did you do, and what are your future plans? Obviously, you can't. It's sold out completely. This is a show that no one.
We never say sold out completely.
You argued with Bernie.
I never argue with Bernie. No, actually, it's interesting. In this show, once again, was a collaboration, and the idea for the poster image was the very first thing we started with, and we talked to Stro and John about that, obviously. But even the company itself came up with ideas for the poster, some of which were quite wonderful, some of which were rather pornographic, and so. But a lot of that thinking about how to present this evening, because it's actually 3 different parts, and you try and get a sensibility for the show that represents all 3 parts, or just do one. Actually, the window card, which we have with us today, is 2-sided because it has 2 of the main images, which are 2 of the plays with Karen Ziemba.
How do you display a 2-sided window card?
Rotate.
At will.
At will, right.
And similarly in our advertising, we've been rotating the images so that people will get a sense that there's more than just one idea to this.
Well, now, you're with an institutional theater which has, you could say, a membership.
That's right.
Of some 50,000. All 50,000 people cannot see your production in a limited engagement,
not
particularly
yet.
since in the initial announced engagement, they can't see that, and obviously, if you have 50,000 membership, that's going to be over 100,000 seats that you have to.
No, they only get to buy 1 ticket. That's the way our membership works, yeah.
They only
A
get
couple has 2 members.
That's right.
That's how you get 2 members.
It's not like a traditional
Right, I understand how you get
2
2 seats.
tickets, don't
You
you?
get 2 memberships. That's right. What is it? Well, could you tell us now, what is the significance of a membership and how that is not the same as a subscription?
Right. Well, in brief, This theater has always done things a little bit unusually for institutional theater. Most notably, we run popular shows for as long as they possibly can. It would be a shame to run Contact for 12 weeks and then close it because you have to bring another play for a subscription season. So we developed, 14 years ago, the membership as an alternative to subscription so that we would have more flexibility and the audience would also have flexibility. Members join for a modest fee. It's now $25. And then they can choose to see or not see whatever we offer them during the year. And they don't see everything that we offer them because we do a lot of shows. So they pick and choose, and some people love musicals, some people don't. So they may have wanted to see Contact in the first instance before the reviews came out or not. Now that the show will have a longer life, they can still see it in the Beaumont.
Do they pay the same price as a non-member when they buy their tickets?
No, members pay a greatly reduced price. And it's, well, right now it's $30, which is compared to top price of $65 for Contact. So it's more than half.
So somebody that pays $25 for a membership, and they see one show, they've already made up their
It's a great
the
bargain,
price of their membership.
which is why we have so
Right.
many and why they renew so regularly.
Would you have a cap at 50,000? I mean, what would happen if you
We
took
actually,
more?
we actually have suspended membership at the moment, and it has less to do with the size of the membership than it does with the number of plays that we're going to be able to offer people at this point. So you can't join right now, but we will reopen at a future date.
Well, now what about subscription? How does that relate to, you have a subscription?
We don't, no.
None
Membership
at all?
replaces that.
Pardon?
Membership replaces that as our core audience.
And does your membership affect both the Mitzi Newhouse and the Vivian Beaumont?
It does. We actually have two categories of membership, one that includes both theaters and one that is a Beaumont-only membership.
And what are the prices of those, though?
Well, it's $25 is the Beaumont membership and $35 for the full membership. But both are now closed.
$35 for the two?
To join for a year. And then all these different members pay $30 a ticket. So it's a great bargain.
It is. More contacts.
That's right. But the Newhouse, because it's a smaller theater, tends to fill up nicely with members. The Beaumont, because it's 3 times the size, the members only represent a portion of the audience, so that's a challenge for us as well.
I think that now we've been talking about institutional theater, and I think more people are familiar perhaps with the commercial theater. I think it would be interesting to know the relationship between the artistic director and the executive producer in how you function and in an institutional theater.
Most of the institutional theaters have this paired structure, and actually it's somewhat misleading to say that the executive producer is the producer and the artistic director is artistic, and has his head in or has her or his head in the clouds, and is not into practical matters. We bill ourselves. It says that Lincoln Center Theater is under the direction of André Bishop and Bernard Gersten. André is responsible for the core artistic decisions. He is the person responsible for repertory and artists. It's like an A&R person. Nobody says A&R, but it is A&R. The responsibilities of the administration, marketing, fundraising, and financing of the theater are primarily my responsibility. But the entire theater is jointly owned and operated, not owned, but operated by André and me, and we've had a very, I think, satisfying, rewarding, peaceful. And
You say that. What does he say?
No, I don't know what he'll say. This is my view. Relationship over what now? 10 years?
9.
What happens? How does it all come about? When you just mentioned the marketing, fundraising, development, take it from the top of how does this happen? You have a meeting, you've got a show. Where do we go from here? Where does Tom come in? Where does your advertising come in?
Well, our offices are strung along a very long hallway, and all the offices give off. So what you do is you walk up and down the hallway, and you
and whoever is there, you
whoever's
pick up.
there,
I
you
see.
talk to, and eventually it works out.
This is actually how it
Sometimes they're
works.
not all there, so you have to do it all by yourself.
Sort of, yeah, on Saturdays and sometimes on Sundays. But the reality is that institutional theaters are set up not for individual shows. They're set up as institutions. They have a program of work. They operate 52 weeks a year. And what we all attempt to do is balance what some people sometimes refer to as the four elements without which you can't have a theater, which is the place where the theater takes place, the money that provides the fuel on which the theater runs, the artists who people the theater, and what am I missing? And the audience. And the audience.
Of them.
Those are the four core elements of the theater. And they redivide. All we do is each theater, both commercial and non-commercial, reorganizes and replans for these four elements in a different way. That's all we do. If you're a commercial producer, you do it on a one production at a time basis. You decide to produce a play, and so you bring together those four elements for that one play. If anybody here wants to produce a play today, let me advise you, it's very difficult to get a theater. And it's hard to do a play without a theater unless you're doing, I think it's Much Ado About Nothing, I think is being done at the bus terminal today. I read about that in the New York Times. You know, it's an on-site specific, site-specific production. But if you want a theater, it's a bad time to be a producer. On the other hand, if you have an institutional theater, you sometimes have a 25-year lease. And we have 5 more years on our lease. We go to 2005. So we have 2 theaters, actually, till 2005, and then we could renew it for another 25 years at, I think, the same rent, which is only $1. That's a very favorable rent. So,
have you asked for a reduction?
Institutional theater.
Have you asked for a reduction?
No. We're rent control.
But you have to, despite the fact that you plan for your whole year and you have all of your plans there, you have to treat each production as a separate piece. So this is a production within the whole thing. But if you take one production, and I'd like to know step by step of how it came to.
But we did that.
André did the creative part
in the
and the
beginning.
telephone
I mean, it's like
call.
God.
No, I got all
You
of
say,
that.
it's too dark out here. I'm going to start creation going.
I want to know
happened
when did
in
the
the process?
advertising come in,
Yes,
and what kind of
When André
advertising?
walked down the hall and said, we better do some advertising.
All
something
right.
like that.
But
in the
actually,
process.
Isabel, you know, the thing is, at Lincoln Center, John and I were brought in to the advertising with Tom and discussed the logo, and Tom was fabulous, and André and Bernie were about collaborating with the people who actually created the show. You don't do that in the commercial theater.
You know, there's something that's been said here. It all sounds very storybook. And those of us who've been through the pain of really creating musicals, and I won't put a label on your show, we'll talk about that, but any kind of show, it doesn't really quite go as rosy as this. Is that really true? Is that what happened?
Let's talk
here for
about the
first
screaming
time?
fits. Let's do that part.
But it sounds
No,
like...
but it has to do with the collaboration and the fact that, because in the commercial theater, you create something and then other people come into it and take it someplace else. And in fact, right down to the poster, they collaborated. And in every step, they make a phone call saying, you know, we want to do a commercial, or we want to do this. What do you think? It's all about collaborating with the people who created it, and that's what makes it different.
Are you ever brought into the cost of it? Well, we would like this commercial, or we would like this poster, but it would cost X number of dollars more.
In a small way, yes, in a small way.
But were there no barbs in this? Is this so untraditional in terms of its creation?
You know, honestly, there weren't. You know, we have been through the wars. I mean, I've been through the wars and come up smelling like a rose, and I've been through the wars and not come up smelling and not come up. Absolutely.
Come up smelling.
You know, come up smelling. You know, but in in either case, the process was similar. In this case, storybook is. I wouldn't want to put that label on it, but it was I believe that the show evolved and was created in as smooth and satisfying a manner from André's first phone call to opening night, as the experience for me was one I don't expect to have again in exactly this way.
Plus, you know, the way that the dancers are treated with great respect at Lincoln Center from everyone in that building, and if you're treated with respect and feel this dignity, you just create more, and you feel a freedom, a sense of freedom to make you even create more. And I know that for them, a lot of them, it's the first time they've really felt that freedom.
There may be a lesson here for all commercial producers, for all actually institutional theaters. If the atmosphere is so pleasant, as you seem to describe it, that maybe that's why it's so telling on stage, that it's so exciting, because it is an unusual piece. And when you tell it, it's kind of like we went into a basement and we created this story, and look at what happened.
Well, but it's not just that the atmosphere was pleasant. I mean, it was that, I think, because of the people involved, but it was, the process was designed so that it never got ahead of itself. It never had to get ahead of itself. There was never an expectation that we felt we had to satisfy.
No timetable. You weren't producing a date. Right.
There was no necessity. There was not a slot we had to fill. There was no expectation as to what that slot had to be filled with. I mean, we've talked about this, but the only thing we had to do was to go into a rehearsal room with a bunch of dancers and see what we had 5 weeks later. That was it. And that, yes, it was pleasant, but it has more to do with the fact that that's the way the show was developed and the fact that we all got along, although we did.
Along with your core of dancers that you've worked with before, how many auditions did you have, or did you have any auditions for dancers?
We had about two, maybe three, looking for just an audition, looking for that girl in the yellow dress, that special girl.
Now, how do you deal with the auditions if somebody is not right for the...
Oh, it's difficult, because whenever I have auditions, I would love to hire them all. Because they all are very talented. If they've made it that far to get in front of me, they're very talented. And it's very difficult to reject anybody.
If they're rejected, what's your process of rejecting someone, though? Do you tell them on the spot?
Take them to dinner first? And then
No, not necessarily. I thank them for being there, and I do try to explore every aspect. Like, for the example of Dancers in Contact, they would do the combination, but then I would toss out different emotions to them. I would want them to do the same combination as if they were flirtatious, or do the same combination as if you were drunk, do the same combination as if you are aggressive, do the same combination if you've never danced before in your life. And see how they do that and act that combination. Because I need people who act, not just dancers. I need people who really act out emotions, and that's part of the process of the audition. And at the end, I thank them for what they have done, and then we actually, then we have a long discussion about who was there. So you cannot make a decision right away. They go away.
So you don't make the decision right away.
No, you'll know if somebody really wows you that person's going to make it. But even then, it's quite a discussion between with John and me laying down.
The reason I'm asking, we've discussed this on seminars before, and there was the point that a director has made that says that he feels it's more honest to say then, as you said, thank you very much, and you really are good, but not quite right, and let them know immediately, as opposed to, you'll hear from us, and they wait for the telephone.
So many times, those people have gone out the door, and I thought, they're not quite right, but when I had this discussion with John or lay them out, they're absolutely right, and they get the job. Because you can make a decision too fast.
Yeah, I mean, there's one aspect of this, and this is really true, I suppose, of any group, but particularly true in this case, is that when we were hiring people initially, we were hiring people for the third piece for the dance club. And the balance of types in the club was something which is very, very important to the way the piece operates. So until we had pictures laid out on a floor
of the club.
Of the club, basically. Somebody might have been spectacular. There might have been two people who were spectacular, but they were so similar that you would not want both of them in the club. So somebody moved off the floor and somebody else moved in. So there was a constant process of sifting.
Could I talk, maybe it's the marketing department, or maybe it's whoever's department is, but eventually someone's going to put a label on what the show is. I mean, you're moving it now into a commercial venue, and maybe some of your 50,000 members will get an opportunity then to see it. What are you going to call it? What would you prefer it to be known as? Because everything eventually gets categorized. And you call it a dance play now.
I think you should go into that first. Why did we call it a dance play?
Mm-hmm.
So ask the question.
Why did we call it a dance play, Barry?
Oh, geez,
no, don't ask me.
Well, I noticed also in your billing that you've changed from, sometimes you are co-authors, and sometimes you're the author and you're the director choreographer, but I see it's written by the two of you.
Yeah.
It was always by Susan Stroman and John
Yeah.
Weidman.
Right.
That's always
at the
there.
top. And then there's other credits.
Then
Separately
specifically
directed
what
and
they do, which I think is unique in itself. That's unique in itself, but it's obviously it's very revealing to exactly what this show is. But all right, what is the answer to the question?
Well,
Why is it a dance?
Let me answer one way first, and then I'll turn it over to Tom. I mean, because I've been asked this question too, and again, you know, when Stroman and I went to work, we simply sat in a room and looked at the tools we had and put them together to see what we would wind up with. There was absolutely no thought as to what the piece would be. It was like watching something unfold. And then when it was finished, the issue of labeling it came up. But what it was not something we ever talked about or worried about. What we should name it was not something we ever gave any thought to while we were creating it. I think that, you know, is revealing about the way in which we got to where we got. You know, now Tom can answer.
All right.
I'll stay out.
Well, I just want to say that the great thing about the phrase "a dance play" is that it triggers a discussion like this. It says to people, well, what is this thing? It's not a play, it's not a musical, or it's both. There's all this dancing, and it positions it, I think, to people to say, it's not quite what you're used to seeing. It's something new. It's something fresh, and that's always exciting for people to see. So I think in the first instance, the first go-round, it was helpful for people to think of it as different, as special. And now people, I think, have embraced it as a musical, and we're perfectly happy to call it a musical.
Well, I don't know if we're perfectly happy.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to call it a musical.
But eventually, don't you think that when you're in a commercial venue, you're going to be up for awards, including our Tony Award? You are probably going to fall into, it would seem you're going to fall into the musical category, yet you don't have any playing musicians, and you don't have any vocals as such.
But that came out of really, because the story is about a man's life flashing before his eyes. As would yours, you would think of songs that were connected. You wouldn't think of a new Broadway show, a new Broadway score if you were leaping off a building. But you would think of songs that... A whole new score, flashbacks. What would you think? You know, but you would think of songs that would push buttons to your own emotions. That's why there are songs in there like Run Around Sue or songs like Beyond the Sea. And because it is swing dancing, but it's not pure swing dancing, because in fact this character doesn't really know what swing dancing is, so he conjures up them swing dancing to Simply Irresistible, which no one would ever do. But in fact, when he sees this beautiful girl, he thinks of the phrase, she's simply irresistible, and that's the song that comes to his mind, and then we put swing dancing on top of it. So in fact, it came out of the idea of the text of the story, of the reality, and it's very contemporary to feel this, of the reality of your subconscious coming out and trying to save you. You would think of songs that push buttons to your own emotion.
Who did select the music? I mean, you have such a eclectic style of music.
Well, John and I both, you know, we laid out. I have a lot of music in my apartment, and it really ranges from classical to jazz.
And you put them all in. I mean, you have
yes. But it's all, for example, in the second piece, it's classical music because the story is about a husband telling his wife not to move. He says, don't move. And of course, he leaves the room and she gets up and does a wild dance. And what she does to rebel, she does classical ballet, because that would be the ultimate rebellion, to say if someone told you not to move, you would get up and do classical ballet when they left the room. So that called for a classical feel. And it's all classical ballet, but classical dance sections of ballet music, so it really has an exuberant dance feeling to it. But in Contact, in our third piece, they're all contemporary classic songs. So in fact, they actually push the emotions of the audience, too.
And let me just add to that, you know, before we got to the workshop, when Stroman and I were designing the piece, she had a sort of an armful of possible songs which we played around with. And you know, the selection of the songs, it was a process that worked back and forth. I mean, the songs, because the songs have beginning, middle, and end, they become scene structures within the piece. And so the choice of a particular song was made as the notion for a particular scene within the piece was developing, and often the song would suggest the scene which would happen during the song, and often it would happen the other way around, that a particular event which was going to occur in the club would suggest a different piece of music that would be the arc over it. So it was a very interesting process.
Plus the idea that it's contemporary, it takes place in a bar, so you see a bartender with CDs.
Yeah.
So everything about it has almost a cinematic quality to it, and a very cinematic quality for 1999.
So what is it? Is it a musical?
Are you asking me? Well, I mean, I think if one has, I think it's more a musical than anything else. So I guess
More a musical than not.
it's more a musical than
But
not.
it was
I mean,
appropriate to the story to use this
yeah,
music rather than a new score.
You know, I mean, Mr. Hirschfeld, the great artist and caricaturist, came to the opening night. He comes to many of our openings, and he sits in the front row. And
He's 94.
he's 94 years old, and a
Fabulous.
great man, and a theater lover, even to this day. And I'd heard, I didn't talk to him, but someone told me that he loved it, and I thought it's going to be very interesting for me to see what this guy who has sat through probably 50 years at least of opening nights and drawn the great 75 years of opening nights and drawn and seen all the great stars of all the great musicals pretty much of the 20th century. And I thought, well, I'd love to know what he's going to make of this show. And he just loved it. And it was reported to us that he said, you know, I honestly feel that this, whatever this is, this form is the new form for musicals in the 21st century. This combination of story and dialogue and song and some version of song and dance. And there he was, this distinguished man at a very advanced stage, just seeing the future of the musical in front of him through his going to
I
contact.
think that's very true.
Well, I think, too, the strength of the characters. A lot of the musicals that have been written in the past 10 years have lost a strength of character, and there are two very strong characters in these stories that the audience gets on and rides with them. They hook onto those characters, and they take that ride with those characters. And I think that what feels fresh to an audience today, because it is lacking in the musicals.
Well, as Susan explained, you need this music. You need the exact actual music that's in the show in order for it to succeed. The classical and the as well as the swing music. Now, you couldn't play that in a pit orchestra. That it just wouldn't work. So, what arrangement do you have with the musician union, and what will you do when you move it to the more commercial venue?
You keep
Pay a
talking
lot
about
of
a
music
commercial
rates.
venue, and I don't know what those are.
Well,
You mean a Broadway theater?
Well, the equivalent of a Broadway theater, when you move it to the Vivian Beaumont,
Well,
where you
it's not a
become
commercial
Tony
venue.
eligible.
It's Lincoln Center Theater. There are no musicians there except when there are. There is no requirement in the house that there be musicians. And so consequently, the whole point of this is not the avoidance of musicians.
No.
Right now in the Vivian Beaumont Theater, there's a more conventional musical taking place, and it has a complement of 19 musicians. So, although this is a commercial discussion that, they've got a new idea for a musical, no musicians. That's not the idea of the musical.
No
really.
strings or brass.
Because we do pay quite a lot for music rights for those musicals.
Well, it's
Somebody's
very
getting
clear.
paid a lot of
Well,
money.
no,
Some
but-
musicians.
But I think
the
no,
music
but-
rights are very
composers
expensive.
and
Composers.
And
yeah.
the recordings, you pay
Yes,
actually for the
you pay a
recordings.
lot of
Payments
money
are
for
being
those
made on
rights.
that. That's the answer.
Right, but I think the point you make is significant in terms of distinguishing the Vivian Beaumont from if this show were to have moved from the Mitzi Newhouse to a
To the Royale.
to a larger house, please,
Right.
but to a
Or
the
the
Broaders.
Barrymore,
Let's say the
something,
Broaders.
whatever.
Let's say if you moved to that, you would have encountered
Where there is a house requirement that there
Right.
be a number of musicians, there would be what are called standby musicians or walkers.
but in this case you're relieved of
Sure.
that because of the nature of it.
Yeah.
Did that enter into your decision in terms of where you were going to move the show?
No.
Not at all.
No, the decision about where you were going to move it is what was available. The Beaumont was available.
I get a
And it
sense
was very
that-
desirable, by the way.
But now we get a sense that perhaps money isn't as critical to the institutional
Hopefully.
theater. And I don't think that's true.
Money is extraordinarily
I know.
critical.
So I think maybe you could develop that a little bit because it sounds like you work in luxury, and the commercial theater people are looking at Contact, and they only wish they could have done it. But the instant excuse is not that we didn't assemble the talent, or not that we're not that creative ourselves, but, well, they're subsidized and they don't have these problems. And I think it'd be
They're not subsidized. I mean, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. They're subsidized. It's such a passive act.
Right.
Just, why doesn't everybody get subsidized? It sounds like a really good thing to do. What you do is you raise money. I mean, you subsidize yourself. You raise money from...
To subsidize your production.
Well, the theater is self-subsidized by the money that it raises. It's not that complex. All of the art apparatus, the art structure, the art infrastructure, the artistic organizations of New York and of the United States and of the world are subsidized. Some of them are subsidized principally by government. Some of them are subsidized by very, very wealthy individuals. Some of them are subsidized by, again, the four categories, these are the other four categories, of those who provide funds, which is government, individuals, foundations, and corporations. Those are the only four sources. Some of us have been looking for a fifth source for years, but meanwhile we're making do with the four sources. The only difference between the commercial theater and the institutional theater, that which is not-for-profit, is that the commercial theater raises money, which is subsidy, which is investment capital, for one show, and either it returns that capital if it succeeds, or it loses that capital if it fails. We plan not to fail artistically, but to fail economically, and therefore we raise the money that we need to operate our theater and to do a number of plays, and every so often the tables are turned on us, and there is a play that is viable and earns more money than it spends. Most of our plays cost more than they earn. And it's very simple in the theater. When plays cost more than they earn, they require subsidy. When they earn more than they cost, they throw off an excess of profit.
And what do you do with that?
You spend it on the future years, or on this year, or on more plays. It's invested. Nobody goes on a vacation to the South Seas as a result of it. In other words, what happens is the money that a not-for-profit theater does earn in excess of its costs either builds up an endowment or endows future years. It's reinvested.
I think that you leave out, I mean, it's a very pat, there's a very pat explanation, Bernie, but I think that in the commercial theater, they are totally dependent upon ticket sales, and in the case of...
No, they're not totally dependent on it. They're totally dependent on ticket sales and capitalization.
Well, once they've
can't
expended
have
their
one
capital,
without the other.
Right. Well, once the capital is expended, they are then at the mercy. And in the institutional theater, because you're doing the kind of product you're doing, you anticipate the economic failure, as you say, so you can keep the show running, whereas in the commercial theater, unless they get further subsidy, if you will.
It's more simply stated than the reality, but okay.
All right.
But that's what I think they can concentrate, too, on the art and the artists. Lincoln Center is the closest thing we have to the Royal National Theatre in London. I've been very lucky to have been asked to work there last year with Trevor Nunn in Oklahoma, and it's that same sort of nurturing, all about the artist, all about the dancer, all about the actor, to make them feel comfortable and not to make it feel like you have to have an ultimate goal, just to let you do the work in the cellar of Lincoln Center, in the cellar of the National Theatre. And that helps the artist create. It's more about for the art of the theater.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if all the theater could be created exactly under this formula, where you plan for financial, economic failure? I think that would be maybe we'd have more productions.
We should all move to London.
But maybe we'd have more productions if they could be based on
Well, we couldn't have more production. Every theater's filled. They're scheduled.
Well, that's because they're waiting for the audience to buy tickets.
I think the coexistence is very interesting. The coexistence of the two sectors is interesting. And the interplay between them is very interesting. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, it's 40 years old. It's only for the last 40 years. I mean, right at this point, it's interesting to look at 100 years of American or New York theater. In the last 40 years, which is only 40% of the century, there has been the not-for-profit theater. It hasn't done in the for-profit theater. The for-profit theater is flourishing. In fact, all they're doing now is regretting that they tore down the theaters they tore down in the 20 years before the last 40 years, you know.
Well, it is cyclical, and I think we're now as our economic...
I think it's...
Or maybe it'll get better.
As articulate as this whole panel is, we still have to stop, and there are still some more questions that I want to ask, and you have to begin churning here because there are lots of things that you haven't explored. It doesn't seem possible. You've been so open about everything, but there's still more that I want to know.
Couldn't think of what to hide.
I do, but we have to wait right now because we're going to stop and take a break, take a deep breath, stand up, and come back right immediately again so we can continue this discussion on the production, the team that made possible Contact, and it's an exciting team, truly. So please just take a deep breath and come right back, and we'll start all over.
You can take off your mic and do it.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to the American Theatre Wing seminar on working in the theatre. Before we return to these wonderfully knowledgeable panelists, I would like to point out to you that the Wing is more than a sponsor of seminars, more than our famous Tony Awards, which is given for excellence in the theatre. We are an organization whose year-round programs are dedicated to serving the theatre and the community with the goal of developing new audiences. And to achieve that goal, we created audience development programs for students, like our Introduction to Broadway program, which began 7 years ago and has enabled almost 80,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, and for many of them for the very first time. And through our Theater in School programs, theater professionals like these in our seminars and the panels go directly into classrooms to work with and talk to students about working in the theater. In addition, we have our hospital program, which dates back to World War II and our legendary stage door canteens. And today's version of the program brings talent from Broadway, off-Broadway, and the cabaret world to entertain patients in hospitals, senior day and nursing facilities, and service organizations, and AIDS care, and child care and hospital facilities in the New York area. They bring the magic of theater to those who cannot get to the theater themselves. We are proud of the work we do and are delighted with the wonderful working relationship we have with the theatrical community. I am grateful to our members and everyone who makes possible all that the American Theatre Wing does. And so, now let's get back to our seminar on the production. And Roy Sumleo, president of the American Theatre Wing, will moderate this and will bring out all the questions that haven't yet been answered on what it is to produce that show called Contact. Roy, will you now start this?
Thank you, Isabel. We've been talking about Contact, so let's find out how did it get its name and what does it mean? So who wants to address it?
Well,
Who
I
named
think
it?
it's well, John and I both, we did toss around different names. Ultimately, the evening is about people making contact and about connection. And it just seemed to be what the show was about ultimately. And it has a clean sound. It looks good. You know, we did toss around some other names, but in fact,
Like
it
what?
has an immediate...
Like what? Like Connection? I mean,
Well, I don't remember.
Connection. I don't know.
I
that
don't
word.
remember,
I don't
Jim.
remember.
Oh.
Because we actually right in the middle of the workshop, we started calling it Contact, the first workshop, and it just has an immediacy to it, you know, and it has a visual. It sums up a visual.
Well, it fits.
And is it
Yes.
short form of contact dancing?
Contact dancing, yes, because swing dancing. It's because the dancing is contact dancing. It's about making contact also. The dance
It's
in it.
metaphoric.
Yes, because even the second piece, although it's not swing dancing, it's classical ballet. It's about Karen Ziemba making contact with the head waiter. That's when she's happiest, when she's connecting, being lifted. So it's when they make contact that she's happiest.
It should be said that when we met with André early on, André said, well, you're not going to call it that, though, are you? And of course, we immediately said, no. And it was only as the piece evolved that it seemed to be, it was as if we'd given our child a temporary name and suddenly it was,
That's like the Chinese idea. Chinese give their children milk names until they find out what the character of the kid is, and then they give
I think this
the
is
full
the same
name.
idea.
Did you have an alternate title in mind at any time?
South Pacific. No, I have this theory now that all good shows, it's of course ludicrous theory, begin with C. The word C, carousel, chorus line, cabaret, contact, and all the shows we're doing this season that I know of so far.
We'll have C in their title.
We're doing a new musical called Mary Christine and the Time of the Cuckoo. No, I think it's like, I mean, I don't mean to, not only old stories, old titles, I mean, the title Oklahoma in its day, which I understand was a
Oklahoma, isn't it?
it was a second title. Originally the show was called Away We Go. And I'm sure if someone said, well, we want to call our show Oklahoma, and that was before they added an exclamation point, well, it's after the fact the title seems appropriate, and I think Contact in the middle, but once the show was done, Contact actually seemed like the perfect title for the whole evening and for the penultimate piece.
I would like to go public now with my theory of names.
Please.
Somebody has to say, well, Bernie, what is your
What
theory
is
of
it?
names? My theory of names is that names tend to act like shrink wrap around that which they are the name of. And I learned this some time back, and I learned it, first of all, in relationship to an individual. Adolf was always a very, very bad name for me when I was a kid, until I met Adolf Green. And then the name Adolf shrunk wrapped around Adolf Green and supplanted Adolf Hitler for me. And Adolf became a perfectly lovely name. The next experience was with a show called Hair, which was the first show we did down at the Public Theater. And these guys came in with very long hair and curly hair and said, the name of this show is Hair. I said, Hair? That's a terrible name for a show. Nobody will ever come to see a show called Hair. It's too dumb a name. And, well, I didn't prevail. And gradually that name shrunk around the show Hair. And hair is something that grows out of your head, was as nothing compared to the show Hair. And did I have another example? Those were two very significant examples of how names form around shows. Contact has changed, has altered in meaning to us, those of us who say Contact a great number of times every day now. And it now is the name of a wonderful evening in the theater, whether it's a musical or a dance play. And that's what Contact means. And Contact will increasingly shrink around this show until Contact will mean the show. And it's irrelevant what former associations you have with the word Contact or what it formerly meant to you. My idea for the poster originally was a photograph of Amelia Earhart standing in front of her airplane with her hands on the propeller, and then the title would say Contact, and everybody would know what the show was about.
I'm glad you didn't prevail. I don't know who said it or where I saw it, but it was Contact and not Contact as well, which I thought was so very. In one of your places, it's
I
a
think
show
it's
about
the
contact
connection
and
the
not
ability not to
making
and the ability
contact,
to, yes.
which is the dramatic part of it as
Because
well.
even in the first short story, which we haven't spoken much about, it's the Fragonard painting on the swing. It's most exciting when they make contact on the swing, when the girl on the swing and the servant get on the swing together and make contact. That's when the story really soars.
Well, you could have called it Whoopi.
Yes, they do that too on the swing. Yes.
Could we get it back to a little bit of the basics of producing the show? Now you've got this successful show. It's at the Mitzi Newhouse Theater. And you have to close it because you've got other plans.
Another C show coming in.
Another show called Connection, maybe? Right.
Cuckoo.
Well, Cuckoo. All right, so you're moving it now to what I consider a commercial atmosphere, if not a commercial theater, Bernie, where it's the ticket prices are similar to the bargain prices on Broadway. Who is your audience? Who are you targeting now when you're moving it up to the 3 times larger theater?
Well, what's great about the show is that it has an almost limitless theater audience because it communicates mostly through dance, as we said, and so there's not the same language barriers, so people who are not strong in English, for example, would enjoy the show greatly. Musicals tend to have broader audiences than plays generally, so we're going after everybody, and I think you'll see a great variety of people in the house.
All right, but
But
the show opens...
the interesting thing about the audience is the range of ages that respond so positively. So that if indeed Alice Hirschfeld is at the furthest extreme of great, great enthusiasts, there are also kids who are coming to the show and really going for it in a big way.
Well, now how do you do this? You've opened a show that will not have tickets available to the general public and for 6 months.
Well, we're selling now, though.
But you're selling. How do you maintain the interest from the people? You're only 300 people a night are able to see the show. Word of mouth is so critical. 30,000 people will see the show, which is considerably less than it would be if you were upstairs now. How are you going to maintain that enthusiasm to get the ticket sales so that you can run the 14 years that this looks like it's destined to run?
They've put John and I out on the street with flyers. Yeah, so we're actually...
We're going
You
to
have to maintain
Yes,
television
right.
shows like this.
But no, you
We're
have to
sending
maintain
$1 to
interest.
every person in the Manhattan zip codes.
But no, if someone can't come see your show
Right.
for 6 months, how do you maintain their interest in it?
Well, we're doing a number of different things. We're obviously doing a lot of print advertising, which some people have already begun to see. We're planning a television campaign. We'll do direct mail. It's ways of sampling the show before you see it, radio campaign, and the reviews and feature stories that continue to come out about the show. There was another review that came out this morning, so it's a continual process.
But my concern is that you get people so excited about wanting to see a show and they can't really get a ticket to see it for another 6 months.
But
And you have
that's, when can you get a ticket for The Lion King, which has been running a year and a half? When's the first available ticket for?
Well, I think they've had that 2 years of
It's not, but
expiration.
it's not dissimilar. You couldn't get them. People know it. The ticket becomes more valuable when you can't get it. You value it more. Or you have to wait for that fulfillment of the pleasure of seeing the show.
But
You
they
look
have
forward to
1,500
it. You get to look forward to it for
Well,
a
you're
longer
right.
period of time.
You're absolutely
That's
right.
really
Except
good.
you're right. Except they have 1,500 salespeople out every night, and you only have 299.
Yeah, but we got the creme de la creme.
We're going to have to come back when you're at the Beaumont and do much more of this, because apparently we have run out of time.
Oh.
And so I have to say thank you so much. And there is so much more that I know that you can give us, and so much more that I would like to ask you. But I have to just start with, this is the American Theater Wing Seminar. We're working in the theater, and the production team of Contact has been with us and is with us, and been so wonderfully, wonderfully grateful we are to you for giving us your time and your energy and explanation of how Contact came apart. Thank you so much for being here.